Hey guys! So this is part 4 of Lrn2Tank, and today I'm going to discuss the Feral Druid spellbook and our priority system. It is most definitely time to get our paws dirty, so let's go. Those good old days of Wrath where Maul was macroed to everything, we fired on cooldown. Well, those are behind us. There's actually a new priority system in town that requires a little bit more thought and a lot more button pressing. First, however, let's have a look at the actual abilities that are part of this priority system. So Demoralizing Roar is our 10% damage reduction debuff for our targets. Every tank has a similar debuff. Warriors have Demoralizing Shout, Paladins have Vindication, Death Knights have Scarlet Fever. Additionally, if you have a friendly Warlock in your group, they can place a Curse of Weakness on a boss, which provides the same debuff. If none of those other debuffs are available on the target at any given moment, you want to Demoralizing Roar. Bear in mind that Demoralizing Roar does count as a spell, so it has a 17% mischance. Crazy, huh? So sometimes you're going to have to actually cast Demo Roar 2, 3, I've even had 5 streaks where it just does not want to stick. It's annoying, but it really is necessary in order to keep the amount of damage that we're taking to a minimum. So Fairy Fire of the Feral Persuasion provides an armor debuff that will stack up to 3 times. It also does some damage and provides extra threat if you cast it while you're in bear form. Like Demoralizing Roar, the ability is considered a spell, so it misses a lot, but it's generally used as a filler in the priority system when more important abilities aren't available. So Lacerate will do initial damage and also puts a bleed on the target that will stack up to 3 times. Lacerate is important because it not only fuels your Pulverize ability, but every time it ticks, it will also trigger the cooldown reset of Mangle, making it extremely important to keep active at all times. Mangle is our major heavy hitting ability. It does a lot of damage, it grants you a lot of threat, and it increases the bleed damage on the target. It's pretty much the button that you're going to want to press every time it's on cooldown, making it the old Fairy Fire replacement. Maul is an ability that is actually not on the global cooldown, and it's pretty much our rage dump. In some fights, you'll be able to actually Maul on cooldown all the time just because you're taking so much damage. But on other fights, if the damage is more bursty or you've got a good avoidance streak, then you put yourself at the risk of rage starving and not being able to use more important abilities like Mangle. Some people use the 60 rage or more as a milestone, whereas others will use the 70 rage or more as the milestone, at which point they'll start to use Maul. Whichever works for you without getting you rage starved is pretty much what you're after. It may take you some practice and some testing to decide what you're comfortable with, but whatever your level of rage at which point you want to start mauling is what's important. Now, in addition to dealing some damage, Pulverize will consume Lacerate stacks to provide up to a 9% extra melee crit chance. A number of the bear abilities are based off of our crits: Savage Defense, Leader of the Pack, Primal Fury, and this is in addition to, it just providing extra damage and threat when we get a critical strike. So this is an ability that you're going to want to have up as much as possible. Preferably as close to 100 as possible, but as you'll see in the priority system, having Pulverize up all the time is not necessarily your best threat option. Swipe is one of our 2 AoE damaging abilities. Swipe is different from the other because you don't have to have a target selected in order to use it. It simply hits everything around you within a 360-degree circle. So if you've got a bunch of mobs coming in from behind, you can still swipe them with your butt, apparently. Or I guess we're Kung Fu bears who do those spinning swipes of awesomeness. If you've seen Kung Fu Panda, that might be what Blizzard was going for. I don't know. The range of swipe isn't exact on the tooltip, but it seems to be about 6 to 8 yards. You can have a little bit of distance, and it will still damage an enemy. Thrash is the other AoE ability. You do have to have a target selected and in range in order to use it, uh, because it deals direct damage to your target, but additionally it will place a bleed on everything in 8 yards, once again in a complete 360-degree circle around you. Even though it does do AoE damage, the direct damage that it does plus that bleed that it puts on the primary target makes it an excellent threat and damage ability even in a single target fight. And we tend to use this ability quite frequently, if not every cooldown. So it sounds like most of these abilities are pretty important, so how exactly do we decide which button to press first? Well, there is a priority order, and for threat, it looks kind of like this. Mangle is your first and foremost. If your Mangle's on cooldown, you want to Lacerate if there are no stacks of Lacerate on the target. This allows Mangle to potentially be procced off of cooldown. Once you've got Mangle and a stack of Mangle on cooldown and Lacerate up, you're going to want to Thrash. After that, you want to build your Lacerate stacks up to 3 if they're not already on the target. After that is Pulverize if there are 3 Lacerate stacks on the target and the buff is about to drop or the buff is already missing. Then if you've met all of those criteria, you Fairy Fire. And if you've met all of those criteria, everything's on cooldown, you've got 3 stacks of Lacerate, Pulverize is not going to drop in the next 3 seconds, then you just Lacerate some more. So it looks kind of hectic, but it's really not a good add-on setup that shows you what your cooldowns are. It lets you know that, oh, your Mangle has procced off of Lacerate from Berserk, so you can press it again. Those sorts of things will definitely make it a lot easier, and I will show you, you've probably gotten an idea of how my add-ons look through these videos, specifically my power auras, but I will show you some other really nifty add-ons that will tell you what button you need to press while you're learning your rotation, or other ways that you can set up, notifications that things are ready. You'll notice that I don't have Demoralizing Roar on the list because where it goes in the priority is really up to you. If you feel that it's more important for you to get that extra threat than to reduce the damage you're taking by 10%, then move your Demoralizing Roar down in the priority order. If not taking that damage sounds good to you because you happen to be married to one of the healers or something else related, and you know you're going to hear about it later, then you want to move it up in the priority order. If you have a warlock who's cursing weakness and is good about keeping it up, or you are, tank swapping with, say, a paladin or a DK who their abilities, if I recall, are triggered based on other abilities they use, then you don't really need to worry about it much at all. I personally, however, leave Demoralizing Roar at the top because it is at least very important to me to make sure that I'm reducing the amount of damage that I take. As usual, what works best for you may not necessarily be what works best for me. So you figure out your sweet spot, and that's where Demo Roar should go. Excuse me. You'll also notice that Maul is not on this list. Maul, as it's not on the global cooldown, does not need to be technically in a priority order. Pretty much once you've determined how much rage is, too much rage to have, you want to hit Maul. For me, I use 70%, so once I'm at 70% rage, I have a power aura that pops up and says, hey, by the way, you've got excess rage, start pressing Maul. So, however you want to handle that, that's fine, but, use Maul whenever you've got the extra rage, and you're not going to rage drive yourself for the more important abilities. Now, if your threat isn't a problem, say you've got, you're halfway through the fight, you've got tons of vengeance stacks, and you know that, damage is going to ramp up, or in general, you just want to start reducing the amount of damage that you're taking, then keeping Pulverize up all the time becomes a little bit more important because of the extra savage defense potential. The priority that I just listed actually doesn't give you the best uptime on Pulverize simply because you're more interested in Mangle and Thrash rather than keeping Pulverize up. So actually keeping Pulverize maximized is kind of a numbers game and also a bit of a gamble based on how often you're missing while building your Lacerate stacks, as well as how often you're missing while you're actually trying to Pulverize. My usual quote-unquote default is to just move Thrash down in the order. So for me, Demo Roar, of course, is going to be the top. Mangle, Lacerate in order to get up to 3 stacks, and then Pulverize. If the buff is getting ready to drop or it's missing, then I'll start worrying about Thrash, then I'll start worrying about Fairy Fire, and then I'll fill with Lacerate as needed. So it changes just a little for me. Once again, what works best for you may be different. Now, AoE in an ideal situation actually has a rotation, and I'm probably going to get, yelled at for saying this, but in the vast majority of situations, it is pretty much a rotation, at least of sorts. I definitely do not suggest macroing it because there are times where you're going to have to deviate from this quote-unquote rotation. So just having one button that you press all the time is probably not that great of an idea. Plus, you're actually only pressing 3 buttons for most of it. So, 3 buttons are really not that many to press. Excuse me. So the priority order for AoE threat is pretty much Thrash, Swipe, Mangle. So the rotation looks kind of like this. You're going to Thrash, then you're going to Swipe. Then you're going to Mangle, then you're going to Swipe. Then you're going to Thrash, then you're going to Swipe. Then you're going to Mangle, then you're going to Swipe. And so forth and so on. The trick is to tab to a new target generally every time that you can, but specifically before each Thrash or Mangle, because they do direct damage, which allows you to build a little bit of extra threat on each of the mobs. If you notice that you're starting to lose a mob, its bar is turning yellow, or you're getting yelled at by the Blizzard information system, then you want to click on it or tab to it immediately and start building your threat back up. Make sure that it's going to be your main Thrash target and your Mangle target. If you do happen to lose it, make sure you taunt it, or you can always just bash it over the head in order to stun it while you continue to build up your threat, using Lacerate, things like that, and then go back into your normal quote-unquote rotation for AoE. Our AoE threat has been buffed, especially with the change to Swipe. However, it's still not quite enough to keep extremely heavy-hitting AoE classes from dying if they're not going to behave themselves. Arms Warriors that pop Blade Storm and Frosty K's that spam Howling Blast are pretty much top of the list. If they don't give you a couple of seconds before, hitting those abilities so that you can build up threat, let them die. Hopefully they'll learn. If not, well, they or their guild are now out a repair cost. But generally against other AoE abilities and those who are actually willing to wait a few seconds before going nuts, we actually hold threat pretty well off of AoE groups. So that's our priority system, both for single target and for AoE. You'll notice that we've barely covered half of our arsenal of abilities. We've got a ton of other abilities such as Burst Threat through Berserk. We've got cooldowns such as Bark Skin and Frenzy Regen. We've got our Interrupt through Skull Bash. We've got that neat Stampeding Roar ability. So next time I'm going to go through those, explain how they work, and give some examples of situations where they're extremely useful. If you have any questions, as usual, please feel free to leave a comment or send me a private message or even track me down on WoW. Otherwise, until next time, take care.